So I just finished watching Untold Shooting Guards, the documentary on the gun charge situation involving Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton on Netflix. And man, I gotta say, man, we're going to unpack this. We're going to unpack this. But first of all, I want to say this, man. I'm a big documentary junkie, man. It doesn't even have to be sports, but it can be whatever. It could be whatever. Every Netflix documentary, I'm on it. I'm on it. I've watched it more than likely 9.9 times out of 10. You say, "Oh, you watch that new Netflix documentary?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I watched it." But yeah, but getting into the documentary, man, it's like what I knew about the situation. I pretty much like everyone. I feel like it's been well documented um in terms of what really went down. Not real what really went down, but the things surrounding it. Um and it was kind of a, I would say, during the time it happened in '09. During the time, it was just a kind of a blur to me, to be honest. But I feel like guys have done some decent or really good deep dives since then to cover what went down. But in terms of this documentary, I want to get into it. Um, let's just talk about how the documentary started off. It talked about basically their backgrounds. Gilbert Arenas, raised by a single dad who was an actor slash bodyguard, which I had no clue, right? And comedy was a theme that kept reoccurring when he was talking about his childhood. Like, he noticed that his dad really loved uh laughter and he loved comedy, so that's what Gilbert Arenas pretty much, honed in on in terms of one of his biggest personality traits, right? And then, on the other side, Javaris Crittenton, he was raised in Atlanta. It talked about how, he played high school ball with Dwight Howard, and so and such, and basically had to get it out the mud. On the other side, you got Gilbert Arenas. He said he was raised in I believe it's the Valley, it's called in California. That's the nickname of the area. And he pretty much wasn't, I don't think he was, you know, rich, but he seemed like he was well off, from what I got from the documentary. So you got two different sides uh of the spectrum, you would say, in terms of how these guys grew up. And then even in even in their NBA careers, right? You got Gilbert Arenas, who, he was um drafted by Golden State out of Arizona, you know, star player. And then Javaris Crittenton, he went to Georgia Tech, drafted by the Lakers. Gilbert ascended, right? He was most improved player in the league. You know, he was one of those young guys to keep your eyes on coming out. And then, Javaris kind of, it was hard to find his way in LA. He even got involved in he even got gang affiliated. We saw the tattoo that they pictured in the documentary. And I would say this, man. I'm gonna just pause it right there. Gilbert Arenas, man, I didn't know he was that, like, he talked about how he would poke at people in terms of annoying them he got a kick out of that. I ain't gonna lie, man. That probably would have annoyed me, man. Even just watching those clips, man. Dog, Gil was annoying. Like, this dude was annoying. I forget. I think the guy with his name was Onwe Story, if I'm not mistaken. And he had like the camcorder or whatever. He kind of kept poking fun at him, and they started like wrestling or whatever the case may be. But dude, Gil seemed like he was annoying. Like, I feel like, how many fights? I want to know how many fights Gil got into growing up. Just people just getting fed up with his shenanigans. And then when you talk about the Wizards, how they both got there, like I talked about Golden State, Gil was a big free agent signing after he left the Warriors, signed with the Wiz, and then Javaris Crittenton was traded. It wasn't a trade. I believe it was a trade um to the Wiz, or either, I think, trade or sign a free agent, one of those two. But he was on his rookie deal, and man, I would say the impact of Gil in DC, like being a kid in DC, during Gil's prime, and it was some like when they talked about his stardom in DC, when he talked about it, that was real, man. Like Gil was one of my favorite players. Like I had the jersey, I had the shoes at basketball camp. Man, I like those white and black Gills at the I had it was the black base with the white accent for the Gil Zeros, man. You just wanted to be like Agent Zero, the buzzer beaters, man. It was a time, man, when Gil, was a superstar in DC. And then, yeah, on the flip side, Javaris, he was, trying to find his way as a role player. And then I feel like just two sides just collided as we saw. Um, they talked about it was basically it's the whole thing stemmed from a card game involving JaVale McGee and Earl Boykins. So Javaris got into it with JaVale, and then Gil got into it with Javaris, and then everything just kind of it was like a domino effect of what came after. And it's crazy to think about. I mean, I feel like it was just all ego, man. You talking about young guys in their 20s and early 20s, and just to be quite frankly, very little minute things, right? You could just call it how it is. Very simple thing. A simple argument sparked this entire this whole domino effect that pretty much derailed not only Javaris's career, but Gil's too. You got to think after that, he wasn't the same Gil. He that year up and into his suspension, he was averaging 22, like 22, 23. I'm not sure about Javaris, but Gil after that, he got shipped out. He was traded to Orlando. I think he had to stint with the Grizzlies as well. He wasn't the same. Gil wasn't. I think he's talked about this on this podcast before. It's like it was kind of like a black cloud. He grew the beard out. It was just. I think he lost the Adidas deal, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. I remember he was like wearing J's and stuff with the Magic, and then Javaris, as they stated, it was he tried to catch on with other teams, and it just didn't pan out with the Bobcats. And then he said, I think it was one more team, but it just never panned out with that suspension, man. And I wonder how in the documentary they mentioned how Peter Vesey got the scoop on the story. Because if you think about it, Peter Vesey, I don't know if it wasn't for Peter Vesey leaking the story, would this have spilled over like it did? Would this be such a big NBA, you call it story debacle, whatever you want to call it? I'm not sure. So I would like who leaked that? It had to be. I think Peter said it was somebody. Is he somebody on the team or definitely somebody in the organization? But that would be very interesting if that ever leaked out. Like who decided to drop the bomb on the whole situation with Gil and Javaris. But yeah, man, and then um story goes on. Javaris, like I said, hard to catch on with teams. Gil kind of, he was basically on the tail end of his career after. And then they keyed in on Javaris because he actually got convicted of manslaughter with all the robberies. He kept getting. I think he got robbed like two or three times at gunpoint in various different cities in his own city. And then he ended up you know committing a crime. And unfortunately, he took the life of a innocent the person he wasn't intended to get that revenge back on. Um, and they went on to talk about his time. Like he only served 10 years of a 23-year sentence, and that wasn't consulted with the family. And then they dropped the theory that you know Dwight Howard's uncle was it the DA, district attorney at the time in Fulton County. and that played the part in Javaris getting such a early release without them consulting with the victim's family and so on and so forth. So that's another thing, man. Like if that's true, then some grimy stuff. I can't lie that the victim's family wasn't consulted, and he got a guy who basically not basically he took the life of that young lady, and his repercussions. I don't think you know that didn't sit well with a lot of people. That didn't sit well with a lot of people, man. But yeah, man, I when it comes to documentaries, not only do I enjoy the story aspect, um, I like hearing both sides, right? Often you kind of get just one side of the story. It's been a couple of documentaries. Y'all know what I'm talking about on Netflix or whatever, wherever you watch your documentary. You only get like one side, right? I feel like with this one they did a good job of painting the picture from both guys' perspective. You got to hear both guys speak, and then you got to hear other people's perspective. Like Andre Blatch was in there. Was Nick Young? I think Nick Young, maybe Nick Young. I think so. And of course the victims' family, and then you had um, one of the former Lakers coaches that coached Javaris while he was in LA. And then yeah, so I felt like they did a great job of painting a picture, giving different perspectives on what actually went down, and really getting uh it made you get a good feel for who Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton really were. Right. I think his mom was in it too, if I'm not mistaken. Javaris's mom was in that too. So I think it was a good doc. If I had to rate it from 1 to 10, I would give it like I would say a 7, 7.5, 7.5. And also with docs, I notice with me, I like the pictures. Like, not to sound like, I like seeing like nice visuals. That's a big component for me. That's why I'm often rerunning documentaries just for the picture and the narration and the storytelling. So that's my takeaway. You had two guys in their early 20s. Not early 20. I think Gil, he may be in his mid 20s. I think Javaris was in his early 20s, and ego just took over. Like something stupid, something plain and simple, something that didn't need to evolve into what it did. And unfortunately, Javaris pretty much got the short end of the stick, I would say. And then it catapulted into he made some bad decisions that ended up him serving jail time, man. Gil, he it derailed his career. He Like he mentioned on his podcast, he kind of slipped into like a black hole depression. And he was really never the same in terms of his greatness on the basketball court. So unfortunate situation that happened. But like I said, I give this documentary like a 7.5 out of 10. In the comments, let me know, man, how did you feel about Untold shooting guards?